Today we're going to be talking to Stephanie Diane, she is part of Sheri's group too, Sheri Salata. And she shared a story about how she met her mother later in life. And her mother is Italian. So that's really what sparked me to reach out to her because of that story. I would like to know more about that story, but she's also a writer and a chef. And she has recipes for plant-based cooking, which is something that we're dabbling in right now. So I thought she has a lot of things that I'm really curious about. So that's why I want to chat with her today. She has a podcast too. We'll see if that's still going, if that's still a thing, because I wasn't able to find it.
She's got a lot of talents.
Yes. And she's a mother. I can't even imagine yes, I can. To imagine what it would be like to meet your mother at 40. So here we are with Stephanie. I reached out to you after a conversation about dreams. Mm-hmm. And you had said that you had this dream of going to Italy too, and with your mom. And then you had said that you had met your mom later on in life. And I was like, what?
I'm still doing that. I'm still going, what?
I don't know if you're ready to share that.
I know it's a bit premature to share, but I'm happy to share nonetheless, because I feel like it's such a beautiful story. I'm totally good with that. I realized, which you may or may not know, all three of us have something in common. I was a massage therapist for 20 years. And I am getting back in the biz after taking a break from the pandemic issues. Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, they're like sisters. I can't believe this. Yes. This is great.
Absolutely. We're like soul sisters.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing your story with our audience, a little bit about what you do?
Yes. Well, I do a lot of things.
Yes.
I do many, many things. It's hard to distill that down into one thing, as I'm sure you do understand, creative and intuitive types. But I'm an artist, for one. I'm a painter. I've been a painter since I was a little girl. I was always drawing and painting and writing poetry and keeping a journal and writing down my dreams, and just a creative little girl. And I also played piano, and I was quite good at it for a long time, and that was my world. But I never really considered myself a writer. That was something that I kept very secret. So it was really all about playing piano and drawing and painting. And when I was 13, I was sent to a grown-up art school in New York City for the summer. I didn't realize to what lengths my family had gone to get me into the ateliers in New York City, but they did. And I spent an entire summer drawing and painting from live models. So there I was at 13, I think about 13. And I was just in heaven, because there I was, the only kid in a room full of grownups with naked people posing.
Oh, wow.
And not just that, but it was the smell of the oil paints and the watching other artists draw and paint. And it was just this whole world that had opened up to me. And it was such a wonderful, magical summer that I spent in New York City. One of my aunts was an opera singer, and she lived in Manhattan. And another aunt as well, she lived in Manhattan as well. But I stayed with this one aunt, my opera singer aunt, for the summer. And it was a summer I will never forget.
Oh my goodness, that sounds like such a gift.
It was such a gift.
Oh my.
And I just really embraced the creative artist in me. And I felt so encouraged by my family and by the people that I was surrounded with in the school. And so I took that with me. And that was something that along the road that my life went, it was just always a part of me. So later, when I lived in New Orleans and I was painting and writing poetry, and I was in a women's writing group, and a lot of the women in my group, they were all novelists, they were all fiction writers, and I was bringing my poetry. And they said, but Steph, we're having a really hard time critiquing your poems because it's not something we're familiar with critiquing. So they encouraged me to write. And I thought, well, gosh, what am I going to write? And I was really a big fan of Anais Nin. And actually, it's really an interesting, when we look back and we see the paths that our life takes, and we're just following the muse. I went into Faulkner Books in New Orleans, and I met my friend. She is a poet there who was working. And I asked to see an Anais Nin book. There was a book that I just wanted to see that they had, and they had some rare editions. And so she took the rolling, the ladder, the library ladder, climbed up to grab this beautiful book. And I opened up the book and I saw Anais Nin's signature inside of the book. And it was a little too expensive for me to buy at the time, but I really wanted it. And I just held that book to my chest and I just felt it, I just felt her. And she was such a mentor to me as a writer. And I loved her prose and the dreamlike quality that she wrote in, and the emotive quality that she wrote with. And so that really spoke to me. And so later on, I was invited by that same friend to a poetry reading in the French Quarter. And it was Robbie Burns' night. And I brought my poems to read. And I was in this room with a bunch of other writers and poets. And we were all reading, from books or from our own writing. And that's where I fell in love with poetry. And I had also met my son's father, who was an Irish poet and a writer. And I saw the spark of my son in his eyes, probably. I thought it was the full moon. And he was reading from a book of poems. And that was how my son came into the world.
Oh,
So my son came into the world because of poetry. And I, this was 22 years ago when I lived in New Orleans. And I was just really loving the whole experience of being a creative artist there and a writer. And that was really where I began saying to myself that I'm a writer. But it's still, I think it's something that I don't know what it is, but it's a very different animal than painting. Painting, I became an abstract painter in New Orleans as well. I was painting a huge commissioned painting of Napoleon on a horse for a client of mine. I was doing decorative painting and murals and faux finishing, things like that. And this one client wanted a huge Napoleon on the rearing horse for his foyer, right?
Oh,
and that has a crazy story. I can keep you here forever. I'm like Scheherazade, I swear. I could save my own life by telling so many stories.
Oh my goodness.
But I was painting that, and it was so intricate. And I'd spent 3 months on this painting. And I just wanted to paint, I was like kind of going out of my mind because I'm like painting the reflection of the light in the horse's eye,
Yeah.
And so I had a fairy godmother, Marta Whistler. She's still such an amazing artist, prolific. Marta Milivojevic Whistler showed up to my doorstep one day in New Orleans and introduced herself. She said, I see you in the window every day painting, and I'm also a painter, and I'd like to introduce myself. And she had these big green eyes and these long gray braids, and she had her dogs with her, and she lived up the street. So I would arrive home sometimes to gifts of paints and brushes and canvases at my doorstep from Marta.
Oh.
And she said to me, don't follow the rules. Just paint whatever you want with whatever you want. So she said, if you have to, just use a house painting brush. You don't need any special brush, okay? So that day, there was this one day that I just went, okay, I've had it. I've been painting detail too much. And I had this huge, like wall-size canvas in my painting studio. And I grabbed a couple of house painting brushes and I squirted out as much blue and purple and like all these beautiful, rich colors. And I just painted. And I was listening to jazz. The jazz station there is amazing. And I just let go. And I just let it out. And that was my beginnings of abstract painting, which kind of took me into a whole other world of expression. But writing was much more introspective, and writing is sometimes incredibly frustrating. And there are many days when you're trying to express yourself and it's just not flowing. And, I never really knew what I wanted to write. So fast forward to me back in Los Angeles. And I decided to do my DNA. I was 48. Here I am, a single mother of 3. And I had my grandmother's passing the year before, which, she was old. She was 97. And I didn't want to accept that. I thought she would live forever.
Mhm.
And then previous to that, in 2015, my father died of a brain tumor. And there were a lot of things that were happening at that time, which provoked me to just go, okay, I know I'm really healthy, but I really, really want to know. Like, I need to make sure. And I used to say to myself, well, I'm not allowed to die yet because I'm raising these 3 little humans. Well, not so little at that time. And they need me because I'm the only family they really have now. And I always had a very estranged, difficult relationship with my mother. It was like, I never really knew what it was, And I know lately I've been trying to write about that, and there's a lot to it. But in 2018, I was 48, and there I am in the doctor's office, and she says, well, let's do 23andMe. I said, okay, sounds good. So I take the kit home, I spit in the tube, send it off, and of course, wait. And it's that anticipation. You don't know what's going to come back. It's kind of fun, right? And I thought that I was more or less of Russian Jewish heritage. My last name, Kordan, used to be Kordonski.
Right.
And I was raised very liberally Jewish in the hills of Los Feliz in LA. And I didn't know a whole lot about my father's family, except for that they were probably a lot of Irish. And I just, I didn't really know what to expect. But I know I kind of had an idea. I started to create our family tree, and I knew all of the names, mostly on my mom's side of the family. And, there were names like Moishe and Chaim and, Yitzhak and, names like that. So when the results come in, it's mostly British, Scottish, Irish, general England, right? Britain, and Italian. I'm like, Italian, Sicilian, Malta, okay. Sweden, all right. Norway, 0 Ashkenazi Jew. I was like, well, that's weird. And then I created this I created a lot of ridiculous scenarios. I was like, well, maybe they went from Sicily to the Ukraine. Like, why would they do that? And I'm like, okay, that doesn't make sense. That's weird. But I didn't really seriously give it a whole lot more thought. I just went, okay, well, there's a lot we don't know. And I just kind of didn't think about it. Then I go back for my doctor's appointment and she says, is there any heart disease in your family? I said, no. She's like, I said, well, none that I mean, I don't know, any colon cancer? No. Okay. She says, because you carry all of the biomarkers for heart attack. I was like, well, it's a good thing I'm plant-based and vegan.
Wow.
And I was like, well, hey, I'm a vegan chef and food blogger and influencer. I promote a plant-based diet. Like, so I'm living what cardiologists would recommend. So I'm good. I'm not worried about that. She's like, okay, well, yeah, just, ask around, ask. I'm like, well, there isn't anybody to ask, except for, of course, I'm not going to call my mom. So I was just like kind of puzzled by all that, but it didn't really sink in until maybe a few weeks later. I got an internal message through 23andMe from a first cousin. And I had never heard of her before. And her name popped up in my match, and they give you a list. I don't know if you've done your DNA, but they give you a list of cousins, right? And she was a first cousin. And she emailed me and she says, hey, we're first cousins. I thought I knew my family and I thought I knew everybody in my family, but I've never heard of you. That's weird. And I was like, I responded and we started, back and forth communication. And we were really mystified. We were trying to figure out how we were first cousins. And I was just really puzzled by that. And I was like, So I contacted the only first cousin that I knew of, which was my cousin Deborah. And Deborah, we didn't really get to spend a whole lot of time together. She was my father's niece. But my parents divorced when I was very young. And there was always this separating and getting back together and a lot of fighting in between. So I lived up the street at my grandparents' a lot of the time. And I just wasn't really close to that side of the family. But Deborah and I had kept in touch. So I texted her and I said, hey, I'd love to chat with you. I did my DNA and there's this first cousin that reached out to me and I thought maybe you might know her. And Deborah, she said, well, let's meet up for coffee. I said, okay. So we planned to meet and I was very excited about this. I hadn't seen her in so long and we had children, she had children, I had children, so much of our lives had passed. And we talked a lot about my father who didn't tell anybody that he was dying. And I needed to talk about it because I wasn't able to properly grieve. So we talked about my dad. We talked about so many things, as you do when you haven't seen each other all your lives. And then she encouraged me to try Ancestry. Now, she had looked at the picture of Krista Butler, my first cousin, in my 23andMe app. And she said, Steph, you really need to try Ancestry. I think that's what you should do. And she encouraged me and said, you can create your family tree. And then when your DNA comes in, it'll match you to everyone and you can kind of build your tree that way. And I was like, okay, cool. I wasn't really thinking anything more of that. And we hugged goodbye and I sent away for my kit for Ancestry. And I did that as well. And the results came in much of the same, which was Scottish, Irish, British, English, Italian. And it was interesting. Deborah looked at my 23andMe ancestry breakdown, and she says, "You're way more Italian than I am. And my mom is Italian." And we kind of laughed about that. I was like, yeah, who's Italian in our family? And I was just like trying to figure this out. So anyway, I got the results back, and Deborah said to me, when you get your results in, pour a glass of wine and give me a call. Well, I didn't really take the wine part seriously, so I made a cup of tea. And I'm so excited. I sit down in front of my laptop. I was looking at the screen, and she says, "Okay, tell me what you see." And I click on DNA matches, and it says immediate family match. And then the username was DEB. And I thought it was her, of course, because I'm buzzing with like this excitement, we're going to build our family trees together, right? And she's very calm. She says, "Steph, look at that again. That's not me." And I was like, "But it says Deb." She says, "No, that's not me." And I was like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Read it." And I read it, and it's really, really small print, and I don't have my bifocals on. And it says parent-child match. I was like, parent-child match. And she says, "Steph, you were adopted." And I was like, and it was almost like every sense, every cell, every sense in my whole being was literally, the room was spinning. I couldn't breathe. And I had no words. And she wanted to tell me, but she didn't know how. And she also knew that there was a story behind it, that she didn't really quite have the whole true story. So she was so supportive and so grounded for me in that moment. And I just didn't know what to do with myself, because it took actually, I think, a couple of years to really absorb that information. And I looked at the details of DEB, which was initials for my dad, Donald Eaton Butler. And then I realized that Donald Eaton Butler was Krista Butler's uncle. And I messaged Krista and said, "Hey, we are first cousins." And after the shock kind of sank in, but I spent a lot of time staring at my face in the mirror, just trying to figure out who these two people, who were my parents, who they were. And I was like, literally examining as an artist too, like every shape, every detail of my face. And then the way my hands and I was like examining my whole, not just my outer being, but also the whole story of my life and everyone in it, and how everything started to, it's like invisible ink, when it starts to appear. When you're drawing in invisible ink in those coloring books where they were like magic crayons or magic markers, and it would illustrate what that was there, but you didn't know it until you drew the marker over the paper. That's how I felt. I felt like there was this revelation of who I was that I was always searching for. And I have no words. The word profound and the word awe are just two words that I come to because those are the closest words in the English language that I can find. But it was just absolutely unbelievably wild and crazy to at 48, almost 50 years old, have come so far in my life with so many twists and turns and plot twists and ups and downs and sadnesses and joys and all of the things that I had experienced in my life suddenly took on a whole new story. And it was the true story. It was the real, the questions that I carried in my heart and in my soul all my life had an answer. And when I was a little girl, I didn't have a whole lot of friends. I used to go to the library at lunchtime and read books and eat my lunch because I was kind of uncomfortable and awkward socially. And I tried, and I think I do a pretty good job now. But I had to push myself, and I had that one best friend, and she used to say, Steph, why do you care so much what people think? And I was like, well, I don't know. I just didn't even think about the fact that I cared what people thought, but I was a people pleaser. And that's one of the things about adopted children, is that you feel like you're not good enough as you are. And I didn't know that because I was adopted at birth. How would I know any different, right? I don't know what people feel like to not be adopted at birth, because the only experience we have is the experience we have. So there were a lot of things about me that finally made sense. And I was like, I am just so shocked. So Deborah was really there for me. And I cried a lot that night. And I cried when I woke up, and I was just like, and I wasn't sad. I was just shocked to my core. And then what all the pieces started to come together, and I have a cinematic memory, and I have a very good memory. I love this one moment, and I love telling it. So my grandfather would sit at the head of the table for Passover, and he sort of presided over all of these women in the Cordan family. And there were my aunts, and there was my mother and my grandmother and me. And after Passover dinner one night, I think I was about 10, he's watching everyone talking and carrying on and finishing the meal. And he leans over to me, and he used to call me Pitzela. He'd say, Pitzela, don't ever bother trying to do our family tree. All you're going to find out is that we were horse thieves and gypsies. And I just thought it was like, so my grandfather adored me, and he called me Pitzela, which I really didn't like. And he called me Pitsy for short. And he even had a boat that he named the Pitsy Bee. But at that time, it just didn't sound like a name I wanted,
Yeah.
And I didn't understand how important he was in my life. And I also didn't understand how much he adored me. But when he said that, don't ever bother doing our family tree. All you're going to find out is that we were horse thieves and gypsies. I kind of took him literally.
Right.
I was like, oh, horse thieves and gypsies. That makes sense. Like, what was I supposed to say, right?
Yeah.
But he was one of these people that you never knew when he was joking or when he was serious. He was just a constant flat affect, like he delivered dry humor. It was an art form. And so that always stuck in my mind, like horse thieves and gypsies. I was like, oh, I'm good at tarot cards. I love tea. I love tea leaves at the bottom of the cup.
Yes.
I see meaning in these things,
Yeah.
And I used to joke that I would one day be Madame Kordanska with her tea leaves and her tarot cards, right? Like a table in the French Quarter. My parents divorced, as I mentioned, when I was in elementary school. My grandparents divorced. And that was more devastating than I think anything. And that set my life off in a totally different trajectory than I had ever thought it would go. I never thought that my life would go from age 14 into hard drugs, running away, drinking, not going to school, truant, living more or less on other people's couches in Venice. I was 12, 13. I didn't see, after my grandparents' divorce, I didn't see, how could I? I was 13. I was in New York City for the summer. And then at that point, I didn't know that my grandparents were trying to cover up these things. And the other thing was my relationship with my mother. So we just never bonded. And I always thought it was me. I always thought it was something I did. And I felt apologetic all the time. Like it was something I did to make her sad. It was something I did why she cried every night and drowned herself in wine, and cigarettes. I just didn't know. So when I was a little girl, I used to love to go digging into her drawers when she wasn't around. And I put on scarves and put on makeup. And so one day I found this jewelry box. And I don't remember how old I was when I found this, but I opened up the box and it was one of those jewelry boxes that had different layers that you pick up one layer and there's another. And at the very bottom, there was this gold locket and it had a D in this beautiful script engraved into the locket. And I opened it up and there was a face of a little baby. And it wasn't my baby face. And the locket was indented. And it was kept deep down at the bottom of the box. And I remember this feeling of seeing this baby's face and just not knowing who this baby was. But there was a feeling I got this shock, like a jolt in me. And my heart was racing faster and I put it away and I tried to put everything back the way I found it. And I tried to pile all the scarves on top of the box and make sure the drawer was pushed in properly. And I kind of felt a little strange about that. I felt like I was snooping where I shouldn't go. And eventually, I think I asked my mom, because I kind of felt guilty about it, that I found the jewelry box and I saw the locket and I didn't know who the baby was. And she didn't know how to tell me. So she was very good at avoiding, and she was very good at covering up. She was so good that I think it was difficult to tell that she was such a sensitive person. And it was difficult to reach her. So I always thought that she was just very pulled together professional businesswoman who was just very analytical, mathematical brain. Why did I suck at math? My dad was an accountant. My mom was an accountant. Like, why was I this expressive, artistic, musical writer type? Like, I just thought, well, okay, well, you never know, right? But there were just a lot of things that didn't match up. And I didn't feel close to either of my parents. I didn't get to see my dad very much. And then he moved into his own apartment. So it was kind of like all of these memories came back. A lot of the things that I pushed away, that I just moved on in life, and I kept moving on and I kept moving on and I kept overcoming. And that whole journey came back to me while I was sitting in front of my laptop looking at the DNA results. I emailed this man who was supposed to be my biological father. And I messaged him, and I was at an absolute loss for what to write, which is not me. I think it was something basic like, hi, it seems that I'm your daughter.
Yeah.
If you want to reach out to me, it's okay. If you don't, I understand. It was something super basic like that because I just didn't know what else to say.
How do you say that? Right.
Right? And then a couple days go by and I'm thinking, oh God. And part of me just didn't even know if this was real. And he messaged me back and he says, yes, you most likely are. Turns out he was living 20 minutes away from me.
Oh.
And which was interesting because I had lived all over LA and I ended up in this house in the valley and he lived in Santa Clarita. And he was married to an artist named Bonnie, who's become a very, very good friend. And he said, well, let's meet. So Bonnie and my dad invited me and the kids over to meet. And it was so amazing, you know, and the things that happened, like my dad and I were wearing the same colors, like not just blue or red or whatever. I was wearing a striped dress with all these different colors, and he was wearing a shirt with those same colors. Like, how do you plan that? So like, they're just like these little things. Like I found out much later after getting to know my dad, I've always eaten a banana down to a certain point because there's a sticker. And I remember as a little girl swinging on the swing, eating a banana, and then I come to the sticker and I was so horrified by that sticker. I forever broke off the edge of a banana. Like the very end, I would never eat. So one day I'm in my dad's kitchen and he says, you know, I never eat the end of a banana. I was like, because of the sticker? He's like, yeah, I always break it off.
Get out of here.
Yeah. So like these little things come up that, so it's not just the color of your eyes or your hair or, you know, things like that, that there's a lot of things, very specific things that you just can't explain. Little quirks.
That's amazing.
And my mom and I have a lot of those things too. It's amazing. My kids are even overjoyed. And that was another thing I didn't even know how to like say, hey, by the way, kids, I found out I'm adopted and you have grandparents.
Oh my gosh.
You have these new grandparents and you have uncles and an aunt and you have cousins. Imagine that, right?
Wow.
And okay, back up here just briefly. Each one of my kids has a different father. So there's there's like a whole grove, there's like a forest of family trees happening. Yeah. So like when I was excited to do my family tree,
yeah,
it's not just tree, it's trees.
Right.
So like,
oh my God.
it's like
That's all
you can't
changing.
see the forest for the trees, but
yes,
you know, and Dad and I were just emailing each other. And I emailed him a bunch of completely cockamamie ideas of how I was who I am, because I could only guess. I thought because he's a musician, he's a guitarist, and I didn't know his age or anything. And I was like, okay, my cousin Deborah said to me, the story her parents told her when because she's a little bit older than me, she said, how come Uncle Ed and Auntie Sheri have a new baby? Because their baby just died. And that was the baby in the locket. So her parents said to her, well, Auntie Sheri's sister, the singer, got pregnant with a musician and they had a baby, but Auntie Sheri can take care of the baby because she just lost her baby. That was sort of this, you know, they didn't know what to tell her. So they thought that was a reasonable story. So Deborah told me this and she goes, look, I don't think this is true, but that's what I was told. So when I messaged my dad, the first few messages, and I said, so you're a guitarist, you're a musician, and I know it's not lost on me that you might have had a fling the summer of 1969. Could it have been my aunt who's a singer? It wasn't improbable.
Yeah.
And I looked like my adoptive family. I looked like them. So that was another thing that was really hard for me to process, was like, how am I not related to them? Okay, so I get to know my dad. And my dad brings out his high school yearbook from Glendale High, where he met my mom. And he opens it up to my mom's page, and I see her school photo. And I see my face.
Oh my gosh.
And it was
Wow.
crazy.
Wow.
It was like seeing myself in my mom in 1969.
Wow.
So she's without a doubt my mother. Now, the mother who raised me, her name is Sharon. Her middle name is Barbara. My mother's name is Barbara DiFrancesco. It took a long time to kind of figure this out, but my grandfather was a doctor. And he worked at the hospital where my mother, my biological mother, gave birth. And his first grandchild was dying. They said it was cancer, but it was actually because my adoptive mother, Sharon, was an X-ray tech. And during the time she was pregnant, they didn't wear protection. The baby David was born very sick. And he died when he was about a year. And then a month later, I was born. So my grandfather, in his grief, made an arrangement to adopt me from the teenage girl that he saw at his hospital. And he made these private arrangements. And my mom, Barbara, even when we spoke the first few times, she told me she remembered him, that he was a very imposing, tall man, and he had a booming voice. And he told her she absolutely cannot change her mind, that it would devastate his daughter. And so I uncovered that. And there was just a lot of unraveling the story, and it became more intricate, and it actually became more than just my story. It became my parents' stories, it became my adoptive family stories, it became my grandparents' stories, my adoptive grandparents' stories. I mean, there were so many people involved that I think it took me a few years to just go, how do I write this when I'm still uncovering and meeting family and learning, meeting my sister for the first time, meeting my brothers for the first time, like meeting my nieces and nephews. So my mom, Barbara DiFrancesco, my dad said, she was the love of my life. And what happened was, sadly, and now that I've learned from my dad's side and then my mom. And of course, you have to remember, they were both barely 17 years old. They were 16, 17. My mom just turned 17 when she had me. My dad's family was very wealthy, lived up in the hills in Glendale. They were all about prestige and what people thought of them. And my grandfather was the president of the Jonathan Club. So no one could know. And so I'm not really clear on the details of this, but what from I can gather is that they were so focused on what people would think that they didn't even think about the fact that they could have a grandchild.
Yeah.
So they sent my dad off to boarding school. They made him absolutely promise that he would never, ever try to reach my mother or find out anything about her again.
Oh my gosh.
My dad called, because rebel through and through. So my dad calls to talk to my mom, and her father answered, my grandfather, Charles, answers the phone and says something to the effect of, "Don't ever call here again or I'll kill you." And he meant it.
Yeah.
And my mom had uncles or something involved in the mafia who had been killed, I guess. Anyway, there's a lot of, I don't know whether it's truth or stories or whatever, but there was some of that on that end. So my dad was just like, I don't care. I want to, talk to Barbara. I want to know what's going on. But, in those days, you just had a phone attached to the wall. You didn't, there wasn't a GPS tracker or a Google, or there was nothing, right? So there was no way when people wanted to cut you out, they could cut you out. And it was really hard to find out. So my dad sent off to boarding school. My mom, meanwhile, has to, not go to school, hide, and, she's pregnant. And she had a lot of difficulty with her father. And so from what I know, she stayed with her older sister while she was pregnant with me, but she knew she had to give me away. So for her, me popping into her life, as I did, finding her on Facebook, well, searching through the ancestry database, finding her marriage certificate, finding her married last name.
Oh my gosh.
Finding her on Facebook, which I did quite easily.
Yeah.
Because I'm good at it. But it's also when you really, really, really want to know.
Yes.
That overrides everything. And I didn't think, I know I probably broke a lot of rules in the way that you're supposed to do these things, although I didn't realize there was a way to do these things, but I just wanted to know my mom.
Yeah.
And so I found her and I messaged her on Facebook, and I looked through her photos, and she had on her cover photo was a big family photo of both of my brothers with their wives and their children. It was a big family photo. And I saw one of my brothers comment on one of the photos. So I reached out to him and I messaged him, not knowing that he was a techie geek. And he responded and he says, can you call me? Because he got on the phone. He goes, look, I don't know how this is going to sound, but I just wanted to make sure you weren't a phishing scam. And that made me laugh, it was kind of funny. And we talked for about an hour.
Oh my goodness.
And he was mind blown because he had no idea. So he told me later, he called his dad right away and said, Dad, there's this woman who reached out to me and she says she's my sister. And his dad, who's this very easygoing, cool guy, he broke down in tears and he said, they took the baby away.
He knew.
He met my mom when my mom was pregnant with me.
Oh,
I have got chills right now.
They got married right after, soon after, months after.
Oh.
And I look at those wedding photos now, and it's just so many things to process. It was just, I'm just I almost didn't know where to begin the story because there was so much to tell and there were so many nuances. I mean, I can even write about the experiences, not only of me meeting my sister or my brothers for the first time, but also what it was like for them, to suddenly have this older sister, because I'm older than everybody.
Yeah.
So when they post on Facebook about how old they are, I'm like, hello. I'm older than you, just FYI.
Right.
But it's so cool to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So how long after, so when you found out, how long did it take you to, I mean, you have to process a bit, but did you go right into looking for them? for
Oh
your
yeah, right away.
right away? How
Oh
long?
yeah, nothing was going to stop me.
Oh, so how when who did you find first? Your
My dad,
father.
yes.
How
And
far?
then my mom,
Uh, how
and
long did that
then my
take?
brother Tim, and then my brother Brian, and then my sister Celeste, and my brother Damien, and then all my nieces and nephews. So that Christmas, I was so excited to send all of these gifts to my nieces and nephews signed Auntie Claus.
Oh my goodness.
And it was just so cool. But so my stepdad, Tom, he's so awesome. And he was so funny because we were chatting on the phone one day and he says, oh, we're so proud of who you are and everything. And, you could have been a biker in Palmdale. And I said, well, you could have been a biker in Palmdale. I mean, there is a gamble, like you don't know who you're going to get, right?
Yeah.
But when I met my mom on my 49th birthday, she drove down. She lives up in Northern California. And she drove down to meet me on my 49th. And it was like meeting myself.
Oh my God.
Like even her voice, her big old hands, like my humongous hands, I can reach over an octave, right? So like the way she blinks, the way she laughs, those little things that you don't know until you're actually around that person. It just, I didn't know what to do with myself, right? And I had met my brother Tim before I met my mom, and my brother Tim flew out for business or whatever, but he was with his wife, and I met him for lunch. And he was just looking at me the whole time and just like he says to me, Steph, I'm sorry if I'm staring, but you're just like our mom.
Wow.
Wow.
He was freaking out. And it did take some time for us to not say my mom, but our mom. There were those little things that are just forgivable, because it's new to me too. Like, I'm like, I didn't know this, and it was a huge shock for my mother. And even though she said, my brothers, they were so celebratory, they were so excited, they wanted to meet and they wanted to throw a party, and my mom was not feeling that way because she carried almost 50 years of pain, sorrow, guilt, shame around. And all of those feelings were making her feel those feelings all over again. Like those feelings that lived in her that she learned to live with were not yet exercised. And so she went through quite a thing when I reached out. And she even expressed some anger towards me for reaching out the way I did. And she just had a lot of things that came out that I had to just accept. Mm-hmm. And later on, she apologized and she did turn a corner. And now we talk a lot. But it was a huge deal. It was huge.
That is so crazy to me.
I mean, almost 50 years after giving birth to me and the nurses taking me right away, she did not get to look at me.
Oh, wow.
And then here I am. Hi, on Facebook. Like, how crazy is that? I mean, I tried to imagine what it felt like for her, but it's really heartbreaking. It's really, and that was the other thing too, which really helps me forgive my adopted mother for our very estranged relationship, which I've tried to mend so many times. I've listened to a lot of Dani Shapiro's podcast called Family Secrets, and I don't know if you're familiar with her.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I was gonna ask you because it sounds so familiar.
Yeah, right. So I do want very much to be on her show.
Yes.
And I listened to her audiobook when she, Inheritance, and her story about being the blonde girl among all the, Jewish, being raised Jewish and being, teased. Oh, is your father the milkman? And she knew, and she does talk about this. I think she calls it the unknown known, which is, I think, was used previously in a different context, but it's when you know, but you really don't know, right? So deep down that something is amiss, but you don't know what that is. And that's very much what it's like to grow up with a secret like that. And the only guess that I can really make is that my grandparents just really wanted to protect me, and perhaps not just me, maybe it was also to protect my adoptive parents, particularly my adoptive mother, because the reasons why I was adopted was out of a lot of grief. And I think that for me, it was really a thing to have a mother, biological mother, who had the grief of giving me away, and then be with a mother who was grieving a child who had just died. So it was really growing up not knowing those things, but knowing them, and that's the unknown known. Getting used to these things took a lot of time, because we form our identity around our family and our friends and our culture and all the things that shape us. But the crazy miracle was to spit in a tube and find this whole other family I had no idea about, and the whole story. And then to know their stories.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I can't wait for your book to come out.
Yeah, me too. Could you imagine, like, what a gift that is, that DNA testing?
It's a gift.
I wonder,
and for me, it was the happiest outcome ever.
What's interesting to me is that, when I first kind of heard about your story, I thought, oh my gosh, in my mind, I'm thinking, I think I would feel so disoriented and mad because, like, all these people lied to me. But as you told it, I feel like what it gave to you is like that connection, that because you knew something inside, you knew it before you knew it, and it was like a confirmation of, yes, it's now things are kind of falling into place for you, so I'm like, okay, yeah, definitely a gift. And just confirmation of, yeah, you knew it.
I knew it. It's a confirmation. It's like I knew all along. My instinct was telling me all this time. I thought that I was just this daydreamer, that I was just this, I always had this longing in me. And I thought it was for, like a romantic, like someday my prince will come kind of longing. But it was actually my parents. So like that made sense, because I was just like, why am I this just yearning, longing dreamer? Like, I guess that's who I am, so it all really gave me so much peace.
We're just gonna have to chat some more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you, Joanne.
Another time.
Okay.
Yes, we'll see you. Have a beautiful day.
Have a beautiful day.
I will see you. Bye.
Bye.